All right. So our speakers today that we thank for being here are Eric Herrenkohl and Mitch Wienick. Eric is the managing director at Achieve Next Human Capital, and he's an executive coach with Kelleher. He brings 30 years of experience in retained executive search and consulting to his executive coaching work. He's worked with leaders from Aramark, Bank of America, Helzberg Diamonds, Nestle, New Balance, Northwestern Mutual Life, Mass Mutual, and mid-sized businesses across 50 different industries. Mitch, who's also a Beacon member, is the president of Kelleher Associates. And at Kelleher, he's responsible for performance and business coaching of senior executives, corporate officers, and board members, as well as counseling of executives in transition. His executive coaching practice centers on executives in areas of board management and relationships, business strategy, onboarding and assimilation, interpersonal relationships, organizational structure and dynamics, and team building and development. So now I'm going to turn it over to Eric and Mitch, and I will put myself on mute.
Terrific. Zoe, thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be with the group and to spend some time together here for this hour. We really appreciate it. So Mitch and I lead programs for various different groups, and we do a lot of this type of work. And this program today, I think we're both particularly excited about. It's focused on sharpening your executive value proposition. And just a little bit of context here, Kelleher, which is a name that many of you are familiar with, became a part of Achieve Next back in 2017. And Mitch and I both are part of that Kelleher executive coaching team within Achieve Next. We do a lot of executive coaching and executive career coaching. So this topic of sharpen your executive value proposition is something that we do a lot of with our career coaching clients, but it is equally applicable to executives who are in a seat, if you will, as well as to independent consultants. And particularly in this crisis environment in which we're operating, it's one of the reasons that Mitch, Zoe, and I really wanted to come back and touch on this topic, because what we have found is that what our value proposition may have been 6 months ago, to some degree, may well have changed if we fast forward till today. And just a story that got me thinking about this is a couple of months ago, I was on a call with a number of different executives, and one CEO in particular that Mitch and I both know. He made the comment, he said, listen, I really think that what companies are looking for in a CEO today, and this, let's say this was early May, is different than what it was on March 1. That comment really struck me, because there are not very many times in history when you can say that a CEO job spec would have changed in the period of 90 days. But I think he was really right. So for all of us in what's going to be a much tougher economic environment than we've seen over the last number of years, the opportunity to step back, sharpen that executive value proposition, and understand this is where we have the best chance of closing an opportunity, whether that's a new job or whether it's a new client. That's very important. So again, I'm just excited that you're with us here today. So with that, here's just a quick roadmap for the time that we're going to spend together over this next 50 minutes or so. Mitch and I are going to give you two slides on why a sharp value proposition is important. I think this is a topic that many of us would kind of implicitly nod our heads to, but it never hurts to get very clear on where the value is. Then I want to show 3 examples of specific executive value propositions, so that this isn't just a conceptual conversation, but rather we start to make it tangible, show you 3 specific examples, executives in different types of roles. And then Mitch and I are going to give you a framework, a 7-component framework for what makes an excellent value proposition. And then we're going to walk through each one of those 7. We're going to give you our own perspective on the relative importance and just highlight some key things, talk about how to develop and how to apply this type of value proposition. So with that, Mitch, why don't you and I give a little bit of context here, and I've been talking here for a bit, so why don't I turn it over to you. If we're just going to give some quick wrap around why a value proposition is so important, what would you emphasize here for the group?
Well, as we say on the screen right now, I think that really says it all. But certainly, if you happen to be in a job search mode, the ability to concisely and persuasively communicate who you are, what you do, and what you contribute is invaluable for networking contacts, and certainly when you're interviewing. But it's also important, as you pointed out earlier, Eric, if you happen to be sitting in a seat but looking to move up in your organization, it's also important for people who are in a position to influence your career to have a very strong, well-etched sense of who you are. And in effect, if they do, it often boils down to what that value proposition is. What value do you bring to an organization? And also relative to that, that others don't necessarily bring to that organization or that situation. So you have to think of it in the context of what you bring to a situation in preference or better than or differently than, in a positive way than others would bring.
It's really interesting. And in fact, what you just said brought to mind crisis leadership, which is a topic that you and I have led a whole other program on. One of the things that we've seen, and many of you all here with us today have likely seen this, is over this last 120 days, there are a number of boards, a number of investors, a number of C-suite leaders who've really gotten to assess who they have on their team. And people that may have looked at least good enough when times were good, the tide went out and some real weaknesses got revealed. And conversely, there have been people who have really been able to step up in a crisis, which is part of their value proposition. And that's really going to help them not just keep their jobs, but it's going to really help them to advance. So it's great. So let's do Mitch, let's do one more slide of the why behind the what, and then we'll get into the meat of the program. Some other things that having a strong value proposition helps you to do. One of the things that I'll highlight here is the fourth bullet point, saying no to low percentage opportunities. And I think this is important in the sense that, for instance, if you're in a job search, it is very easy to be spread way too thin and be looking at a whole range of opportunities. And the fact is, if you want to spend your life applying to jobs online today, you could do that for all eternity. But the ability to get very clear on saying, listen, it's not, the goal here is not to make an application. The goal here is to get a role that really lines up with my expertise, with my passion, and with my compensation requirements. That ability to bring focus absolutely starts with a value proposition and a good one. Anything else for you, Mitch, that you'd highlight before we jump into the rest of the program here?
Well, I want to build on that point, Eric. You know, we know very well, particularly for people who are in career transition, who haven't been in career transition for a while, if ever, can get very anxious about that situation, and for good reason. And so your point about trying to broaden the aperture, you know, I qualify for many sorts of roles, is a natural reaction, because the thought is, well, if I throw my hook out, you know, in enough areas of the sea, I will, you know, make a catch. But in truth, it really doesn't operate that way. And the ability to refine who you are is just as important for the candidate as it is for the hiring executive, or as it is for the person who might have a decision in terms of a promotion. So the discipline is a self-discipline as well as a discipline for others. And, you know, as you and I both know, because we do it all the time, we are constantly trying to narrow our clients to the point where they really are stellar in that narrow frame. And it's recognizable by people that they're talking to, either networking with or interviewing with.
100%. And actually now I want to build on what you said. We can take that same lens and shine it on even a seated executive. And this is interesting, but you know, one of the things about a crisis environment, and I would think this is particularly true from March 15th through May 15th. It was all hands on deck in many, many companies with which we work. and people were just doing whatever needed to get done. Now, there's something great about that. But now that we're kind of, now here we are in July, we're starting to move into a somewhat unknown, but still definitely going to be a new phase. From a career development standpoint, we have to make sure that we're in a role, but that we don't get drawn long-term into things that do not play to our strengths. Because if we decide to camp out and start doing things for the next 12 to 18 months that don't play to our strengths, but are important to the organization, and we're not able to move the needle in a meaningful way, we're not going to end up in a good light. So again, just one more application, we can apply that same thing to independent consultants as well in terms of the markets upon which we focus. We've got some very senior, been there, done that people on this session with us. So I don't think that we need to convince anybody of the importance of it, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to just to step back and refresh our minds on why this is such an important topic. Mm-hmm. So with that, here's what I'd like to do, and I'm going to give everybody a moment. Let me say, first of all, Zoe's going to send these slides out after the program, so you don't have to furiously take notes. But I'm going to give everybody a moment just to read through 3 different examples of a value proposition. And on this example 1, I'll tell you, this is for a career coaching client of mine, very sharp, and she recently obtained a role with a high-profile private equity firm. So she's going to be a finance director, kind of a CFO for CFOs within a private equity context. And what I'll tell you is that on this slide, you see her value proposition, which she got into about the 7th interview. It was a very extensive interview process. One of the leaders of the private equity firm grabbed onto one sentence in this value proposition and said, this sentence really speaks to me. I really appreciate how you put this, and I think it really resonates with me. This is very much what we're about. And it was just a good reminder to her, and I think a good reminder to me and to us. Words do matter, and the ideas and the strategy behind those words at an executive level really do matter from a positioning standpoint. So with that, here's example 1. Here's a second example. We'll move from a CFO to a CHRO. And again, I'll just give you an opportunity to scan through this. There are going to be some differences in each of these, both in terms of content and in terms of structure, but a lot of similarities that Mitch and I are going to break down for you in just a moment. And then finally, here's a third example to a general manager, COO. So with that, as I said, I wanted to see some examples so that we're not just talking about the concepts, but the practicalities of what this can look like. Mitch, why don't you and I, this is the roadmap. So I'll tell you what I'll do here is let me just walk through these quickly. Mitch, I'll ask you if you have any additional voiceover on any of these. And then we'll literally going to go through the rest of this program is going to be steps 1 through 7. We're going to walk through each of these components and talk about how to develop them. So I guess I should ask you before I plunge in here, have any questions come up so far in the chat that you think we ought to deal with, or should I keep plunging forward?
None here so far, so feel free to keep going.
Okay, and I would just invite everybody, given the fact that we're doing a webinar format, if you do have questions, please enter them in the chat, and then once we get to the end of the program, Mitch and I will engage with those and do our best. So 7 components of a value proposition. They are, first of all, I am a what? What's your professional identity? Where do you fit? Number 2, what's your expertise? What are your specific competencies and skills? And you can think about a few of the examples that we just showed in terms of this format, that this was definitely integrated in there. Number 3 is my strengths include, and what are your unique and differentiating qualities? Mitch and I are going to spend some time talking about that. But this is something that we really give some thought to for every one of our clients. And we always advise executives to really give some thought to this. So we'll pay that off when we get there. I have created value in what are your accomplishments, and not just general broad accomplishments. What are the specific accomplishments that you have that support and prove, if you will, the value proposition that you're claiming? Number 5, I have experience in these industries and organizations. We're going to talk about that. Number 6, here's what I'm looking for. And number 7, here's how you can help me. So this is sort of value proposition plus, but these components are very, very important. Mitch, anything that I missed, anything that I skipped over that you'd like to emphasize before we move on here?
Well, I would just emphasize a couple of things, Eric. One is that items 6 and 7 that you have up there are largely really for people who are in transition, less so for people who are inside of organizations. And this is one of those situations where, although we lay out these 7 steps, the principle of less is more is very operative here. That if you can really boil yourself down to several of these, not necessarily all of them, that's perfectly fine too. If you can really bring your point across in a very concise and focused manner. We chatted about this the other day, and I'm dating myself a little bit, but when I was a kid, there was a TV show on that was a Western, and the title of the show was also what appeared on a business card for the main character, and the title of the show was Have Gun, Will Travel. You know, that's a value proposition in 4 words. And back in the Old West, I suppose it was unmistakable. And I'm not suggesting that people have to have 4-word value propositions, but the tighter you can make it, and the more communicative you can make it, telegraphic even, the better. Nevertheless, you know, the points that you went through and the points we'll talk about in a little bit more depth are the building blocks of an excellent value proposition.
Yeah, very good. And I love that have gun will travel. The first time I heard that was when you and I were practicing for this on Tuesday morning. I used it with a client Tuesday afternoon, but I did quote you. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're just going to go step by step, chunk by chunk. We're going to talk about these and kind of give you our perspective. So, Mitch, I have this is a little bit of a pet thing for me. So I'll start on professional identity. So as Zoe said in our introductions, many of you know Mitch. Mitch has a long and very well established career here with Kelleher here in the Philadelphia area. Very well known executive coach. He was the CEO of a New York Stock Exchange company. So Mitch is a very established presence here in our market. I have a background in retained executive search. So for about 20 years, I ran a boutique retained executive search firm. Our search focus was on end-to-end supply chain, but then I did a lot of organizational consulting with every kind of private business you've ever heard of. But I will tell you from a headhunter's perspective, this is something when I didn't see it, I got frustrated. So if I looked at a resume and I couldn't tell immediately where somebody fit on an organizational chart, my tendency was to not even read further. I need to know where you fit. So it's fine for instance, from a consulting standpoint, or if you're not currently employed, to be maybe a phraseology like I have in the first bullet here. I'm an expert in process improvement. Good, I get it, still specific. But I'll tell you, for executives in transition, are you a senior finance leader? Do you fit in the HR box? Where do you fit? So while it seems like this would just be something you just skim over so we can get to the heart of the matter, specificity and clarity about where you fit on an org chart is very important. All right, so Mitch, I'm gonna take some deep breaths. I'll allow my blood pressure to come down. What else, if anything, would you add on this slide?
Well, I'd say that, for people who have been in a singular type of role for most of their career, this is a lot easier to do. Okay. Now, you and I both know that we encounter clients who've done a variety of things over the course of their careers. They might have been an operating executive, and before that, a finance leader, or some combination, or they might have been working on special projects for a while for a CEO. And so some of them are genuinely stumped about, how to do this. And, my typical advice is that while it's, again, good to be well-rounded in many instances, you have to do some declaring here. You have to make it simple for someone to understand who you are. So for those people who have had some varied experience, and it seems that's more common these days than it was 10 or even 20 years ago, mm-hmm. You do have to narrow it down to help somebody figure out how to think about you. And so you do have to make some choices here, and they may be painful because you feel that part of your experience is being omitted, or you're not the complete executive, or you're not presenting yourself as a complete executive you'd like to. But my advice, and I think yours typically is that even with that, you want to define yourself in the best possible way you can, so that you can, in fact, convince someone you can truly add value in the area that you've selected.
It's a great point, and it's always easy to tell people narrow it down until it's you, and then you feel like, well, but everything I've done is important. So right. Yeah, it's an important point. All right, very good. So that's step number one is what's your professional identity, i.e., where do you fit on an org chart? Expertise. So, you know, again, I'll harken back to retained executive search. One of the things that you learn in search is that not all CFOs, for example, are made equally. And some of those differences are just caliber, but some of those differences are, where is this person best in a business cycle? Some people are great in high growth businesses. Others are great in steady state businesses. Others are about turnarounds. Others have strong restructuring background. Others really have M&A. Again, this is, in a sense, this is just kind of continuing along this specificity path to say, what is it that you're really good at? What is it that I'm really good at? And to get very clear about that, and to be marketing the way, again, I like the Venn diagram. If you can picture in your mind the Collins hedgehog concept, which is, you know, what are you really good at? What do you really enjoy? Where's the strongest market for your abilities? So abilities, for skills and passion, and then a marketplace for those things. Being very specific and clear about where you think those competencies and skills have the biggest market is really important. Mitch, what additional perspective do you have here?
Well, I want to tag along on a point that you made just a moment ago, Eric, and just reinforce that there's a very high correlation generally, certainly with senior executives, between what they like to do and what they're good at. And in fact, that's a good thing, to be doing what you like to do. So, and if you're honest with yourself, you really can determine what you're quite good at and what you're not so good at, and therefore what you like to do and what you don't like to do, because people genuinely don't like to do what they're not good at. Yep. So, you know, personal preference and what energizes you to go to work every day is important, even if going to work means just going to your desk in your house these days. But it's important, you know, to really understand that. So I couldn't agree more that you have to understand where you belong. You know, we often have, again, back to my notion of people want to spread their fishing lines as widely as possible. You know, you get somebody who comes out of a Fortune 20 company and says, I'm really interested in venture capital. I mean, it's really the other side of the spectrum in terms of size of enterprise, resources available, support systems, and it's just incongruous and unbelievable, frankly. Stretches the imagination that someone who's been in a Fortune 50 or Fortune 20 company for the last 25 years is going to be a pro at venture capital. Just doesn't compute, and people won't find it credible.
Absolutely, 100%. And here's a theme that I think we'll develop in the next few slides. Sometimes it is the parameters and the limits that actually increase and drive creativity. And we could talk about that principle in many different contexts. But one of the things that I think that we have both seen is, if executives can get very, very clear on where they really are the best, not that you have some exposure. You know, a million people have some exposure. Where are you really the best? Where do you really stand out? Even though that initially can feel very limiting, ultimately it actually can be very expansive. Because if, for example, if you're going to cross industry lines, you have a heck of a lot better chance of crossing industry lines if you're marketing yourself in an area of true expertise and passion than if you try to do that in areas where you've just dabbled. So again, this is a topic you and I could talk about, for the rest of our time together, but there's a lot here.
Mhm.
Okay. So now we're going to, in a sense, kind of bring some of these things together and talk about your strengths, meaning really differentiation. And so again, the way I would bring this together, Mitch, is to say, so we've talked about where do you fit on an org chart? We've talked about where are your particular skills and expertise, but how do those things combine? How are you articulating for yourself how these come together and help you in a very unique fashion to deliver value? In fact, if this first bullet point, a leader who cultivates collaborative cultures with a financial focus, that actually was the line on the resume that the 7th interviewer at this private equity firm grabbed onto and said, that really speaks to me, to the CFO. And she laughed and thought to herself, well, Eric wrote that line. but be that as it may, they really are, I may have wordsmithed it. This is what she said. This is really what she was best at. And so again, this idea of clarity around differentiation, I think it's really worth it to spend some time and process on this to get clear about this for each of us in our own minds. Mitch, how about your take on this?
Well, a point you've heard me make in another context in the past, Eric, I think is applicable here too. We find that we work with some very accomplished people who do really an outstanding job in role. They've had, a series of accomplishments that are really impressive. And part of the reason they can do that is because they really understand, almost in a granular fashion, what it is that creates success in the businesses and in the positions they've been in. Mm. And in a sense, we're really asking them to take the same sort of discipline and self-reflective and analytical view to their own capabilities in really thinking about their strengths. We know that almost everybody we work with has some strengths, and the ability to really settle on those and then expand them a little bit so that they're really expressive and well-defined is a critical piece of describing yourself, and of course doing that verbally and on paper, and electronically, of course, these days. So the fact that we have some specifics here that get to a little bit more granularity is important when you're really describing yourself. So my point is that we encourage clients to really use the same sort of keen disciplines they use to advance their businesses or their function or what they're called upon to do at work in their own behalf. And it really takes that sort of diligence and focus to be successful in a job search or to be successful in being selected for that next critical role and the one after that in a career.
Yeah, Mitch, you have made this point before, and I love it, and because I think one of the points is it really is an encouragement to executives that they have developed these muscles. They've developed these muscles often to an extraordinarily high level within their jobs. We're just asking them to use the same muscles for a different exercise. We want them to apply those muscles to themselves. I think it's a great point. Before we move on, we've talked about executives in transition. We've talked about executives in the seat. Let's talk about independent consultants and business owners, entrepreneurs for a moment, because I think this point really is highly applicable there as well. So when my experience, as I said, I led my own firm for about 20 years. And my experience is that, and then probably in the first 5 years, you have no idea. All you are is afraid, and you'll do anything that comes along. But there comes a point where you do need to get focused. You do need to be able to say no to opportunities. And I think this is a place where getting very clear about where am I uniquely good? And that then turns, the mirror image of that is, what's the image of a client, a prospective client who is really a great fit for me? And then it becomes about our willingness to focus our business development efforts to fill the funnel with as many of those kinds of prospective clients as well. the best independent consultants, the best consulting firms, the best service advisors that I know have an extremely clear picture of this in their own minds, and they have turned it, they've translated into their business development efforts so that they are doing a good amount of regular prospecting, and they're always looking for these people, and they're willing to say no as much as they can to other opportunities. Mm-hmm. So with that, let's turn to accomplishments.
Can I just make one more point, Eric, before we do that, just quickly? In addition to what you said, you also talked about business ownership and really business leadership, and knowing what you do especially well also gives you an opportunity to figure out who you need to hire to complement what you do well. Because unless you have a one-person firm, which some people of course do, but if you have more than yourself in that firm, you really need to often balance what you can do well versus what other people can do well. And one of the things probably many of us saw during this pandemic is this special on the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. And it was pretty clear that the Bulls only started to win when the team was built around Michael Jackson and Michael Jordan and his talents. And before that, they weren't winners. So, it's the same thing that applies to a successful pro sports franchise also applies to the business world. So again, knowing what you do well is a good entree to knowing what sort of skills and abilities and experience you need to hire to run a successful business or own a successful business.
Terrific. 100%. Thank you. So let's talk then for a moment about supporting accomplishments. So a couple of things, and actually not that you all haven't stared at these as long as Mitch and I have. Only one of the three value proposition examples that I shared actually had a quantified set of accomplishments integrated into them. So you may, or they may or may not be the first, in the first, second, or third sentence out of your mouth. But one of the ways, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that we're going to apply a value proposition is just conversationally. That we're going to have kind of an elevator pitch, a first one or two lines, and we're going to be talking with people about our business. But we want to be able to be very intentional about articulating accomplishments that we have that support and buttress our value proposition. So there's an intentionality here in identifying and selecting the accomplishments that support what we're claiming that we can do, because by and large, the people to whom we are describing ourselves don't know us. And so they have no level of comfort that we can actually do what we're claiming. We need to be able to support that with personal accomplishments. That's part of what we're trying to get at here. Mitch, how about from your perspective on accomplishments relative to a value proposition?
Well, I think, accomplishments, in fact, are the raw material that help you determine what your value proposition is. What have you done over the course of your career?
Yep.
And we both know that the heart of most interviews, the selection criteria really involve, among other things, the substance and the impact of your accomplishments. I mean, there are other things that you get hired because of or for, but accomplishments are at the heart. It is your credibility. It's the reason why. It's the basis for making the decision. And as you look at these three, all of them have some level of quantification, whether it's 3 PE-backed companies, 200 clients in 18 months, or saving $2 million and restructuring the 60-employee HR team. So while not every accomplishment lends itself to quantification, many do. And to the extent you can quantify, you should. We live in a world of metrics. We live in a world of data analytics. We live in a world of artificial intelligence. And so quantification, numerology, if you will, does matter. And most accomplishments, really significant accomplishments, are a combination of qualitative as well as quantifiable pieces.
Right.
So it's really important to be able to do that.
All right, very good. So Mitch, if I can, let me ask you a follow-up question here on accomplishment stories and the ability to express, whether in written or orally, the accomplishments we have, but to kind of tell the story of those accomplishments. Just talk a little bit, if you would, on your perspective there and why that ends up being so important.
Well, when you think about how you get hired, let's say, or how you get promoted, you know, in addition to doing the accomplishments, you're often describing them, and you're in effect telling stories. Even though stories are thousands of years old, people are still um, programmed to listen carefully to stories, and a good accomplishment really fits the bill for a good story. So an accomplishment usually starts with a problem or a challenge or an opportunity, which is the beginning. Then there's the work that's done, that's the middle of the story, and then there's the result, which is usually the end. So you have a beginning, middle, and end, or a problem, an action, and a result. So the correlation and the parallels are significant. You would have a correlation of about 0.99. And so if you can house your accomplishments in a gripping story, it's really, it is gripping for the people who are listening as well as for the person who's telling it.
Yeah.
So we constantly encourage clients to write out their accomplishment stories before they ever put together their resumes, and before they ever put together their elevator speech, and before they ever put together their LinkedIn profile, because it is really the critical raw material that goes into all of those.
Interesting. So Mitch, I'll tell you an interesting story that I just, from a client over the last week. I have a client, CHRO client, very, very sharp. And he, among other things, a very accomplished networker. So he started working with me, and then almost immediately I was able to get him, helped him get an introduction to the CEO of a company that was looking for a CHRO, which is, terrific. And his resume and he's overseen recruiting, at pretty broad and sophisticated level. So he's no amateur at this. His resume is actually very good. His accomplishments are very well quantified. And we were just moving so quickly, among other things, that we didn't spend a lot of time having him literally write out the story of his accomplishments until we got to interview prep. And then he was getting ready for a third round of interviews with SVP level folks at this company. And I started asking him typical interview questions. He started giving me typical answers. It was like watching an F-18 fly by. He moved so fast over his accomplishments, just how he's wired. And one of the things I told him, I was like, listen, you've done all these things and it's terrific, but I'm going to really recommend that you step back and literally write these out, because the story is not coming through. And you need to be able to walk people through step by step in a live body detail kind of way in order to make it as persuasive as possible. So it was an interesting case study for me on even people who seem to have it all together really benefit from the kind of exercises that we work on with clients and this kind of thought process here.
Sure. I mean, most movies we see are an hour and a half or 2 hours, and you can probably summarize the plot in about 2 sentences.
True.
But, Hollywood puts together an hour and a half or 2 hour film because they really tell the story that, in a sense, embodies the accomplishment or the drama that's in the movie. So, what you were saying to your client is really important, because you capture people's imagination. It becomes memorable. It's indelible in their minds if you can tell a very good story surrounding your accomplishment.
Yeah. Excellent. Very good. Okay. Industry experience. Mitch, my perspective on this is this ties directly back to I don't want to pigeonhole myself. And I would say, actually, if you look at the examples that we lined out and the process that we have delivered, we've spent a lot of time here talking about expertise and unique abilities that transcend, or at least can transcend, industry lines. So we don't diminish the importance of understanding your marketability outside of your industry. At the same time, we have some very senior people here on this session. So you all tell us, when you're hiring, do you typically look for people with industry experience? Whether or not we should, we do. Whether or not we should, we do. So I think it is very important to, in our value proposition, speak to a specific sector or segment where we deliver the most value. If nothing else, that's going to help people to help us. They're going to know, okay, I get it. You're very articulate. You're able to articulate your strengths. I like your accomplishments. This is the industry vertical or verticals that you really know. who do I know? Mitch, what's your take on industry experience?
Well, I think you're spot on, Eric. But I would go a step further and say that, we recognize that on occasion, people really want to change industries. The industry that they're in have less than stellar prospects. As you look at the economy now, we see some industries are thriving and some of them are, may not continue. And so it's important, I think, for people to also step back and really understand the elements of the value chain of their industry, because very often if you can understand the elements of the value chain of your industry or the prevalent business models in your industry, and you understand those pieces well, you may well be able to identify another industry with identical or at least very similar business model or in the totality of value chain. And so it's a way for people to be able to switch industries because they can talk about the essentials that they've been able to master in their prior industry that has direct applicability to this new industry. And often people don't think about it that way. And that's both on the candidate side and the hiring side, but it's incredibly important to be able to do that, particularly at senior levels, if you do want to try to cross over industries.
That's great. And to your point, if we don't understand the themes and the commonalities, or whether it's independent, the go-to-market model or the various aspects, if we don't understand those things and aren't able to explain how what we have such deep experience in transfers to other industries, we can't expect other people to appreciate them. Conversely, if we put the time and effort in to clarify this, then, let's say you're at a socially distant summer barbecue and you get talking to a neighbor and it turns out that they need an SVP of fill in the blank and they're in industry X and you're in industry Y. But the fact is that company has decided that they need some diversity of thinking, if nothing else. They need new thought. They don't want to just hire somebody from the industry, and you're a known quantity because you have a shared relationship in your neighbor. And all of a sudden, the work that you put into in this kind of thinking that Mitch has described here really pays off, because over a beer standing around in the backyard, you're able to articulate it in a very comfortable fashion. So I appreciate that point. Okay, so we're down to last couple of slides. We'll cover these and we'll make sure to allow a solid 10 minutes or so for discussion. I believe, and as Mitch indicated up front, I mean, these next two are particularly relevant to executives in transition, but I tend to think it's important for all of us in whatever mode and kind of place in our careers we are. What is it exactly that we are looking for? I hate quoting popular culture because all it does is date you unless you're 16 years old. But, that very famous line from the movie Jerry Maguire, help me to help you. We have got to help people to help us. So we have to, be very clear on what it is that we are looking for. Where do we want to make contacts? And you can look at the bullet points here. It's mid-market manufacturers that want to improve their global supply chains. That could be a supply chain consultant. A professional service firm seeking to fill their digital sales funnel. I'm working with a client right now who's a very accomplished senior level marketing and communications executive. She could do a lot of different things, but professional service firms is exactly where she fits. P-backed software and tech-enabled companies. Just specificity and clarity on what it is that you're looking for is something that I emphasize that we articulate and write down. Mitch, what's your take here?
Well, I'll just use a quote that I've used over the years, which is, if you don't know your destination, any direction will do. So knowing your destination, knowing what you're looking for is really critical, because if you don't, you're just going to go around in circles. And who should know better than you in terms of what you're looking for? Now, I don't pretend that it's easy in every case to decide what it is.
Right.
It takes some work and it takes some introspection, and it takes looking at the marketplace to determine that, but it's essential really to do this well if you expect to get help from anybody else, during the journey, and frankly, to land well, so that you're a very good fit for the role that you've just accepted.
Excellent. Last slide, or at least last, content-driven slide here. We have to ask for help. I have 4 kids, ages 20, 18, 16, and 14. And one thing anybody who has kids knows, kids are not afraid to ask, right? And some of them are absolutely master negotiators. Literally, the first 2 to 3 no's is just the cost of doing business. I mean, they don't even hear. Many of us, as we get older, really don't like doing that. And if we're an executive in transition, for example, it's a real switch of gears to start having to ask for help. I mean, we're used to people coming to us, not us having to go to them. I guess my pitch here is to say this, that people really do want to help, number one. Number two, if we put the time in, this kind of clarity of thinking, most people are not this prepared. We all know that. We have people coming to us all the time. All of us do, right? But if we put this kind of time into being clear, as Mitch has indicated, around saying, it's not any direction. I'm heading, this is my outcome. This is what success looks like. This is the direction that I'm heading. Let's ask people for specific contacts, whether they may be organizations, it might be in industries, it might be specific decision influencers. But at this point, if we've done this kind of preparation, we're coming off pretty well. We owe it to ourselves to ask people specifically for referrals. Mitch, I know this is something that you work on a lot with your clients very successfully. So what else would you share on this?
Well, I think you were very articulate, Eric. I couldn't agree more. I would just make the point that if you look at any successful individual in any field, whether it's medicine, business, the law, government, virtually every one of them became successful because of other people who helped them along the way and put them in touch with still others. So nobody does it alone, as you said, and that's particularly the case when you're out looking for a job or looking to get promoted inside of a company. And so the ability to, as you put it, ask for help, ask for support in a very professional, knowledge-based way is critical to the search process and critical to your trajectory within a company. So, we really stress and frankly offer as a firm the notion of connections, not only in individuals' connections for themselves, but the connections that we have that we put at their disposal when they're in the search situation, which many of them are. So it's an excellent point, and that's really what the whole purpose of networking is, right? It's to get somebody to help you to get closer to the job that you ultimately want.
Very good. So Zoe, I think that's it. There are mugshots, and we're always, Mitch and I like what we do, so we're always love talking to people about it. Glad to field your questions. And Zoe, how would you like to do questions? Do you want to do them? You want to feed them to us? Do you want to open people up and just let people ask? However you want to go about it.
Yeah, we have a couple in the chat, so maybe we can start with those, and if people have other questions, we can get to them after. There's 2 here that kind of I want to blend together a little bit, and they're both kind of about how do you actually utilize this? Okay, you've written your value proposition. Now, is it on your resume, in your LinkedIn description? Is it an oral presentation tool? And then another similar question was, is this like your elevator pitch? Yeah. Or how do you make it your elevator pitch?
I'll give my quick take, and then I'm interested in Mitch's thoughts on this. I may have actually glossed over this a little quickly in the beginning because I think it's an important question. I view the value proposition and the examples that I shared, those are taken from people's resumes. So I would say, simple answer is, yeah, I think that goes on your resume. But I really view it as a positioning statement, as a kind of a marketing strategy positioning statement. And then I think once we have it and all the different components, then we can apply it in different ways. So an elevator pitch, that's certainly not going to be, that's not coming all out of your mouth, hopefully in an elevator, literally or figuratively, right? But if you might talk about being a CFO in PE-backed companies who puts a big emphasis on building collaborative cultures with a financial focus. I think that could easily be an elevator pitch. And then different other components of that would get applied in your LinkedIn profile, in cover letters and transmittal letters. I think the verbiage is fungible and can get applied in multiple contexts. But when you've gone through the 7 steps that Mitch and I just ran through, you kind of have all the material that you need to work with. Mitch, what did I miss?
Well, I'll do this by example, Eric, and we talked about this the other day, but my very first job in business was in brand management at P&G, and the brand that I worked on was Dawn dishwashing liquid when it was in test market. And we had a theme, really the positioning of the brand was takes grease out of your way, which it did better than any other dishwashing liquid out there, which is why it became #1 in the marketplace. But everything we did, whether it was the labeling, the advertising, the promotion, the messaging, all was consistent in theme. So I think that principle really applies here. So a value proposition can be used almost anywhere, whether it's a resume, your LinkedIn profile, what you're saying verbally to somebody when you're sitting down with them, assuming we ever start to sit down with people again. So I think it's universal. You might not use, as you said, every piece in every situation, but you really want that internal consistency and integration that's so important in really conveying who you are to your target audience, whether it's internal in a company or external when you're looking for your next position.
Excellent. Yeah, totally agree.
Our next question is, are you a fan of writing different value propositions for different types of positions you might apply to, or do you believe in a one-size-fits-all value prop for each executive, and why?
All right, so I have a strong feeling on this, so I'm going to share it really quick, and then Mitch can tell me if I'm off base. I don't think there's anything wrong with tailoring a value proposition or a particular statement or a particular resume to fit an industry or a role. But I would really seriously question a dramatically different value proposition for company X versus company Y. I mean, what is it exactly that we're going to do differently? If I really understand at my core professionally where I deliver the most value in the way that that is most unique and gives me the greatest competitive advantage, am I gonna is there a 180 of that I deliver to the company down the street? It never makes really any sense to me. So I would say partly you've got it when the core of it is going to stay strong, but you are changing things relative to industry verbiage, specific companies, ... I don't know. I'm not sure Mitch and I have ever talked about that way. So Mitch, what do you think about that?
I generally agree, Eric, but I'd also say, as I mentioned earlier, we know that some people have had very varied careers, haven't done the same thing over the years. So if somebody, for example, has been at one point a chief financial officer and at another point a chief strategy officer, and they'd be willing to take either type of job, there's nothing wrong with having a finely tuned CFO value proposition and the second value proposition that's somewhat different for the chief strategy officer. So I think it really depends on circumstance. But I don't disagree with your point about trying to create a unity, under the right circumstances. So I think you really have to just understand an individual situation.
Got it. All right, that's good. I like it. Anything else, Zoe?
Yeah, I think, Irvin, did you have a question? Did you want to ask it yourself?
Eric, beyond the elevator pitch, when you're trying to develop a rapport that goes beyond a pitch, especially during social distancing time where you're really not that close to people.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation? I'm in the wealth advisory field.
Yeah.
And I think this is really important because the whole purpose is to develop a rapport and to find people that want a fiduciary to represent them as an advocate.
That's a great.
So if that's the mission, how do you present your value proposition during social distancing?
Great question. So I have a client who made some initial introductions to some contacts that I had referred him to, and that's part of, as Mitch mentioned, is part of what we do. And he didn't really get much of a response. And so, but these were important contacts. And so I went back and took a look at it with him, and I said, listen, Joe, I need you to really dig in. Take a look at the LinkedIn profile for the individual that we're trying to reach, and really study it and think about the points of commonality. And one of the points of commonality, he realized they both played football in college. Now, the guy, he played football at Colby, and the guy he's trying to reach played football at Stanford. So I'm not saying, and he wasn't saying it was apples to apples, but he actually came up with an introductory email that said, at the bottom, not the top, but said, hey, a point of commonality is, both college football, but he called out the Stanford versus Colby difference. Immediate response. So, now if you're a successful wealth advisor, you've been doing this stuff, probably since you were in diapers, but this kind of fundamental finding personal commonalities that A, demonstrate commonality, but B, also demonstrate we've done our homework. We like, you're an important person. I really do want to reach out. That's my quick take on that. Mitch, what else would you add to that?
Okay. I would say there's a model that I like to think about that I use in a couple of different contexts, but the way you really make connections is through your head, your heart, and your hands. And when we talk about value proposition, we're largely talking about our head. But the way to build rapport with people is through the heart. And the way to really demonstrate credibility is through your hands, doing things. So I think there's a continuum, and I think you really have to build rapport before you can start to talk about value propositions. So I think, you really have to, as you said, you have to be able to find commonalities with other people or common interests that then set the stage for delivering the value proposition, the things that you can bring to that individual or that organization.
Thank you very much. Both excellent ideas.
Our next program, Zoe, it's going to be the 3 H's, using your head, heart, and hands in developing personal rapport. I can see it now.
All right.
You came up with that quick. So I don't know if I did see one other comment in here, which was just please review the 3 examples that you presented earlier. So I don't know if you have a minute to just go back to those with what we've learned in mind, or if you have to jump off.
I always say that Mitch and I strive to be excellent, but the one thing we have under our control is to be on time. So I'm glad to spend another minute and go back. I just want to be cognizant. I guess maybe what I could say here to everybody on the show is we are going to be sending these slides out. So if you'd prefer to cut to your 3 o'clock, by all means do that. And also, again, please reach out to me. Please reach out to Mitch. We love talking about this stuff, and we'd love to connect with you if you have any questions. But having said that, I'm glad to go back, Zoe, if you'd like, and let's take a quick look.
Eric, I am going to have to cut out because I do have a 3 o'clock myself.
You got it. Okay.
So thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Give me just a moment. I'm going to make sure I don't have it. I'm pretty sure I don't. No, I'm good. Okay. So yeah, here's example 1. Again, I think the components of it are pretty straightforward. You will see that here, 3 successful exits and a 4th that grew from 25 million to 100 million in revenues in 3 years. So what we do here is actually incorporate some numbers into the actual value proposition. This executive would talk about those things very early. And those are just impressive numbers just broadly. But specifically in the world of private equity, if you've had successful exits, right? And for her, those successful exits were all strategic buyers. And then a 4th that, all the numbers were there, but there were a set of reasons that they didn't get bought. That's sort of that's a requirement to play, right? That's the requirement to start to continue to move up the food chain in terms of PE-backed companies. So within the world of private equity, those numbers really mean a lot. So that's something I would point out there.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.